My name is Bodhi Manyat, and today I'll be discussing Polari, a coded language used primarily by British gay men during the 20th century. Rather than examining a famous monument or museum collection, I'll argue that Polari itself is an important example of intangible cultural heritage and explore how libraries, archives, museums, and digital technologies are preserving it for future generations. What is Polari? Polari developed from a mix of older languages and dialects, including Italian, Romani, Yiddish, Cockney rhyming slang, and theatrical jargon. At a time when homosexuality was illegal in Britain, it provided gay men with a way to recognize one another and communicate more safely, reducing the risk of persecution. Although its roots can be traced to 19th century theatrical, maritime, and traveling communities, Polari reached its peak between the 1930s and the late 1960s. During these decades, homosexual acts between men remained criminal offenses in Britain, and being publicly identified as gay could result in arrest, imprisonment, job loss, or social ostracism. In this environment, Polari served both practical and social purposes. Speakers could use it publicly to identify other gay men, warn each other about police or potential danger, gossip, flirt, and build connections without being fully understood by outsiders. More than just a secret code, Polari fostered a sense of belonging and helped strengthen community ties. Because it embodies shared traditions, language, and cultural knowledge rather than physical objects, it aligns with UNESCO's definition of intangible cultural heritage. The language began to decline after the partial decriminalization of homosexuality in England and Wales in 1967. As social attitudes gradually became more accepting and LGBTQ communities grew more visible, the need for a secret form of communication diminished. Many speakers consciously abandoned Polari because they no longer wanted or needed to conceal their identities. Ironically, the language began to fade just as community helped protect was gaining greater freedom and visibility. Why does it matter? So, language preserves identity. Polari gave speakers a shared vocabulary that distinguished insiders from outsiders. Speaking Polari wasn't simply using different words, it signaled membership in a community whose identity often had to remain hidden. Memory. Even after Polari declined, many expressions survived and were passed informally between generations. These words became linguistic artifacts that preserved pieces of LGBTQ history long after many of the speakers were gone. Community. Shared language creates trust. In an era when public disclosure could be dangerous, recognizing familiar words helped individuals locate community, friendship, and belonging. History. Every surviving Polari word reflects a specific historical reality. The language reminds us that LGBTQ people developed sophisticated cultural traditions during periods when their existence was criminalized. My own experience illustrates this continuity. Growing up in Baton Rouge, I heard words like trade, queen, dish, frock, and zhuzh without realizing they connected me to a much older linguistic tradition. The accidental transmission demonstrates how cultural heritage can survive even when speakers no longer consciously recognize its origins. Libraries, archives, museums, monuments, and sites. Although Polari has no physical heritage site or monuments, several cultural institutions actively preserve its history. The British Library documents recordings and publications related to LGBTQ history. The Bishopsgate Institute houses one of the largest LGBTQIA archival collections in the United Kingdom, including the Lesbian and Gay News Media Archive. Queer Britain Museum interprets LGBTQ history for the public, while scholars such as Paul Baker have created dictionaries and digital research projects that preserve the language itself. International frameworks. Although Polari is not included on UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage, it embodies many of the principles outlined in the 2003 Convention for Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. UNESCO identifies 5 domains of intangible heritage: oral traditions and expressions, performing arts, social practices, knowledge concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship. Polari is most closely associated with oral traditions because language serves as a key means of transmitting cultural knowledge, identity, and shared experiences across generations. More than a collection of words, Polari reflects the history and lived experiences of the community that created it. The language demonstrates how oral traditions can preserve memories, social relationships, and cultural identity, particularly among groups whose histories have often been marginalized or overlooked. Preserving Polari helps ensure that future generations can better understand how LGBTQ people navigated discrimination, built supportive networks, and expressed their identities during a time when doing so openly often carried significant personal risk. In this way, safeguarding Polari preserves more than vocabulary. It preserves a unique social history and the lived experiences embedded within the language itself. Technology and digital preservation. Technology has transformed the preservation of endangered languages, making it possible to document and share them with audiences far beyond their original communities. In the case of Polari, institutions such as the British Library, the Bishopsgate Institute's Lesbian and Gay News Media Archive, and Queer Britain have digitized recordings, publications, and other historical materials, allowing researchers and the public to access them online. Scholars such as Paul Baker have also contributed dictionaries, linguistic studies, and digital resources that document Polari's vocabulary and usage. Podcasts, YouTube documentaries, online dictionaries, and digital exhibitions further expand awareness of the language, helping keep it accessible even as the number of fluent speakers has declined. Emerging technologies may strengthen these efforts even further. AI-assisted transcription, searchable digital corpora, and interactive language databases can make oral histories easier to preserve, analyze, and share. By improving access to historical recordings and community knowledge, these tools offer new ways to safeguard Polari and other endangered LGBTQIA+ languages for further generations. Critical issues and current news. One of the most interesting questions surrounding Polari is whether it is truly disappearing. Many of its original speakers have died, and the social conditions that gave rise to the language have largely faded. At the same time, words such as camp, drag, trade, and zhuzh have entered the mainstream culture through television, drag performance, and social media. Meanwhile, the closure of many LGBTQ bars, bookstores, and community spaces has reduced some of the traditional opportunities for passing cultural knowledge between generations. New digital spaces have emerged to fill part of that gap. Elements of the language are commercialized through programs such as Queer Eye and RuPaul's Drag Race and used on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where Polari-derived language has been introduced to millions of people who may have little awareness of its history. As a result, Polari may be evolving rather than disappearing. This raises an important heritage question. When elements of a community's culture become widely adopted by the broader public, do they remain primarily the heritage of the group that created them, or they become part of a shared cultural landscape? In conclusion, Polari demonstrates that cultural heritage is far more than monuments or archaeological sites. It shows that language, memory, identity, and community deserve preservation as well. Although the language has changed significantly, libraries, archives, museums, scholars, and digital technologies continue to preserve its history. Polari reminds us that cultural heritage is living. It evolves, adapts, and survives through the people who continue to remember and reinterpret it. Perhaps Polari teaches us that cultural heritage does not always disappear. Sometimes it survives by changing. Thank you for your time and attention today. Please take note of the list of references that I used to develop this slide presentation. Thank you.